Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Today's Job Interviews, Don't Wing It. The session is brought to you by the American Diabetes Association's Focus on Fellows Early Career webinar series. Thank you to those who have attended our Focus on Fellows sessions last year. And for those of you that are new, we'll be providing additional information on how you can join the Focus on Fellows program to get access to great sessions like this. My name is Stephanie Kim, and I'll be moderating today's program. To share a little bit about me, I recently graduated from endocrine fellowship at UCSF, and I'm currently working as a sub-investigator at a clinical research company. None of this would be possible without the guidance of ADA's Early Career Advisory Group. We'd like to thank the members for all their hard work to develop today's program. We're also very grateful for the support of the Leona M and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust, who have made this meeting a possibility. Focus on Fellows offers a career development program for early career fellows who treat diabetes and its complications. We have several upcoming early career webinar sessions this spring, with our main program taking place on Friday, June 3rd at the ADA's 82nd Scientific Sessions in New Orleans. This event will be in person, so we encourage you to attend. The Focus on Fellows program will also include sprint lectures and mini workshops, plus networking opportunities. Attendees who participate in the Focus on Fellows program will be eligible for complimentary registration to the 82nd Scientific Sessions and a free ADA professional membership. If you're not already a part of our Focus on Fellows program, we encourage you to join. Visit the website link in the chat for more information and to apply. By joining the Focus on Fellows program, you also become a professional member of the American Diabetes Association. This free ADA membership will provide even more opportunities to network and grow professionally. The ADA memberships include a variety of professional member benefits, including meeting discounts, women's interprofessional network, interest groups, access to Diabetes Pro member forum, professional journals, members-only webinars, member directory, standards of medical care in diabetes, and Diabetes Pro quarterly. As you can see, you will have access to lots of great resources as an ADA professional member. You'll receive information about membership following today's session. Now we'll transition to today's program. Please note that today's presentation will include Q&A. If you have questions as we move through the presentation, please type them in the Q&A box in your control panel. We'll be answering as many questions as we can at the end of the session. I now have the privilege of introducing Mrs. Ann Hull. Mrs. Hull is a president and lead consultant for Hull Strategies, LLC. She has a master's of education specializing in career development counseling, with over 20 years of experience providing career development consulting, training, and organization development solutions to private and public sector clients, and conducts workshops and is a speaker at national conferences on career management and job search, and developed the Career Scope program for American Association of Applied Sciences. She co-authored Winning Strategies for the Mature Job Seeker and PhDs at the Crossroads for Career Planning Career Planning Academy online training. She was contracted with NASA Goddard Space Flight Center as a career coach. She established and managed a federally funded career resource center in a top-ranked college and was affiliated with a national outplacement firm for 12 years. We're very excited to have Mrs. Hull joining us today. With that said, I'll turn it over to you, Mrs. Hull.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kim. I am so happy to be here with you today and to share this information with you both live as well as those of you who may be watching the recording. One of the things that I've noticed when I work with very, very smart people is sometimes they have a hard time talking about themselves and giving a good impression in the interview. So what I'm going to be sharing with you today is from the employer's perspective of what are some of the things that they're looking for and how can you best prepare yourself to leave a really good lasting impression. So our objectives today are fourfold. First of all, let's explore some of the commonly asked questions that people are asked in interviews. And even though if you don't get these exact questions, if you prepare for them, you're miles ahead of your competition in the interview process. I'm going to give you a proven strategy to craft your responses so that you incorporate the elements that the employer is looking for. And then also, we're going to review some of the questions that you should ask during the interview and learn how you can close that interview and Stay top of mind for that employer and leave that good impression that I just mentioned. The way I want to go about this is a before, during, and after approach. So we're going to look at what happens, what needs to be happening before the interview, what you can do during the interview, and then these frequently asked questions. I will address some of the pandemic issues that have come up. And then most importantly is what to do after the interview. Let's get started. And I'd like to hear from you what you feel is the purpose of the interview. So this is a poll, and let's go ahead and take a quick look at this poll. All right, so yes, indeed, sometimes it does seem like an interview is a necessary evil to get the job, but you have answered the middle two questions very concisely in terms that, yeah, it's a two-way conversation. And most people don't realize that it is indeed an opportunity to meet people that you might not have otherwise met. Sometimes it's a good idea to interview for a job that might not be exactly what you want, but it's an opportunity for them to get to know you and to see that how you might be positioned for another role in the organization that perhaps they haven't started interviewing for. So you never know how those interviews can go. So these are great answers. Thank you. So as I mentioned, the purpose is twofold: for both you, the candidate, to find out if you're a good match or fit, and for the employer to find the best person that they can. Most of us know the interview process begins with a notification of some type, a email, a text, or sometimes a phone call. And then there's usually a screening interview just to verify the application and resume information and get some general data from you before you actually meet with an interviewing panel or hiring manager. And that is the next step. Sometimes you'll be meeting with a group of people, which could include the hiring manager as well as those who are affiliated with that role, or you might meet with them one-on-one in a rotation, and that can be a grueling day of interviews. Following that, they often narrow down the field of candidates, and you may be asked for a follow-up interview where you'll go either more in depth or go back over some of the information revealed or go a different direction to show further expertise that you can share with them. And then the last phase, of course, is the offer and the opportunity to negotiate for that job. And yes, you should always negotiate. So what do you do to prepare for your interview? Here's another poll I'd love for you to give me your thoughts on. Again, as many as that you do, mark those in this poll. Yes, indeed, you should do all of these things. And I'm so happy to see most of you have marked that you do your due diligence before the interview. So one of the things I would like to talk about first is the video interview, because that seems to be pervasively the way we're doing so many of our interviews now. And I just want to cover some of the basics of being able to interview well via video. And if you have ideas and tips that you could share with the rest of us, we'd love to see those in the chat as well. So the first thing, of course, is to prep your tech, making sure that your camera, your speaker, your mic, all are in good working order before you sign on to the call. And then check again using their technology to make sure it's working with their technology. Make sure you close any unnecessary apps so that they don't accidentally pop up during the interview, and also silence your phone or your alerts so that you don't have any extraneous noises as well. And also, you're setting the stage for the interview with this video. And so you need to make sure that you have a nice, clean, neat background, no packing boxes in the background, no propellers coming out of your head from a ceiling fan or a plant growing out of your ear. Making sure that you're got your noise distractions minimized by closing doors and windows. And the other thing that a lot of people don't realize is to take a look at the lighting. So many of us have overhead lights that cast these horrible shadows down on our faces. So you can just set a lamp behind your camera, your tablet, your laptop, whatever you're camera is on so that you have light coming straight at you. Many of us use the popular ring lights now. And the camera should frame your shoulders and your head. Make sure that we're not just seeing the top of your head or the dreaded up the nostrils approach either. So if you have other tips and techniques, feel free to share those in the chat with us as well. Eye contact. This is very difficult because we tend to look at the faces on the screen and sometimes we get distracted at looking at ourselves on the side. But your eye contact needs to be with that little camera eye. And I know this feels awkward, and the only way to get better at it is to practice. Try to limit your body movement so that you're not swiveling in the chair. Our nervousness can come across this way. Or if you've got the foot shaking, sometimes that can make the rest of your body shake and you don't know it. Keep your hands away from your face or away from the screen because that can be very distracting as well. So again, just practice with some friends. You can do your own Zoom videos or whatever technology you want to use to practice the technology, how you look on camera. Now then, what types of questions should you expect? There are basically 4 kinds. The first kind is what we refer to as a behavioral question. These tend to be competency-based, and the employer is looking, in this case, indeed, for examples of how you have handled situations in the past as a predictor of how you're going to be handling them in the future. Next question is the scenario or situational based questions. These questions start with asking the questions, what would you do if you were, and they begin with their scenario. The behavioral questions, to back up a moment, start with tell me about a time when, or give us an example of, and they are looking for specific examples. In the situation, they're looking for how do you think on your feet? And this might be something along the lines of you find yourself in a situation where the usual protocol can't be followed and you've got 10 minutes to make a decision. How do you go about making the best decision you can? The next type of question usually tend to be your technically based questions. These are your skill-based. And again, they're looking for what kind of problem-solving process do you follow in the way you think through the situation. And then finally, and what we're going to concentrate on today are those standard or frequently asked questions. And these are questions that are trying to gauge, are you going to be a good fit with us? All these questions in the interview at your level are going to be looking for 8 basic competencies. And you want to make sure that you have good, solid examples of how you excel in all 8 of these areas. Your ability to collaborate with others. Your leadership includes not only how you lead, but also how you are a good team member or a follower. They're also going to be looking at your analytical abilities, your abilities to make decisions, especially when you don't have all the data that you would like to have. We're looking at flexibility and adaptability, and haven't we gotten good at that this past year? They're also looking at your ability to communicate both verbally and sometimes in writing, but more importantly, how you communicate upward to your peers and with your colleagues and with people who may not be in your profession, as well as to your clients and patients. We're also always looking for how do you handle conflict, because it is inevitable. What is your primary go-to approach, and where have you had to do something different than that? And then, of course, how technically savvy are you? Can you understand the rudiments? What kinds of software are you familiar with that might be appropriate for the role that you're interviewing for? I know I'm racing through this right now. I want to make sure I have time for your questions. Feel free to ask them as we go along. Now, I'm going to address all 6 of these questions in depth. First and foremost, I want to give you a structure, and this is a proven strategy of how to structure your answers to most of the questions when they're asking for examples. You want to, first of all, give them situation or context. Why are you even explaining this situation to them? And then, What was the task or the obstacles or the parameters you faced in the situation? Thirdly, what was the action that you took? You may have been part of a team, but you still had specific contributions, and that's what they want to know about. And then, what happened? What was the result? Why was it important that you did this? What would have happened if you hadn't done this? We're looking for what value that you have added. So let me give you an example. This is a behavioral question because it starts with, tell me about a time when, and in this case, they're asking for performed well under enormous pressure. Now, if you say, well, I generally tend to do that, you're not giving them specific example that they're asking for, so you're not answering your question. You want to use the STAR format by, first of all, offering the situation or the context of why did you find yourself in this particular situation? And I think you can read this quicker than I can read it to you. The next step is, what was the task? What was presented to you? And this, how did you get involved with it? And more often than not, it may be something that's assigned to you, or it could be something that you initiated to resolve the problem. And then, what actions did you take? Whether you had to renegotiate current roles, whether you had to create something, develop something from scratch, brand new. We're looking for all these things that start with action verbs as you talk about them. And then finally, so what? And I don't mean that sarcastically, but why did it matter? Why was it important? And what was the outcome? When you're talking about results, it can be results to you personally, or it could be results for the people that you were working with or the organization that you were a part of. So I usually spend most of my time working with clients on these types of responses for their interview questions, making sure they're in the STAR format. You don't always have to make it in this order, but as long as you have all four pieces, then you're going to have the information that the employer is looking for. So fill in the blank. Use the chat and fill in the blank. When was the last time you were asked to describe a situation or scenario? And the most important part that's frequently omitted is, the answer is the result. More often than not, we don't think about the impact our accomplishment had. We get too wrapped up on describing what happened and all the different nuances of it that we forget that, oh yeah, there was a point to all of this. And that's how you wrap up your example. And it gives you a nice, clean, neat response to their questions. So I'm going to show you a number of examples that use this format. Dreaded, tell me about yourself. Oh, why do they ask this question? Well, it's a way to find out, how do you talk about yourself? And in order to get you talking about something, they ask you about yourself because, gee, hopefully you know quite a lot about that topic. So a couple of tips to help you in responding to this question is, don't ramble on and on. Don't start with just a review of your resume, but stick to your professional content and highlight the accomplishments that are relevant to this particular job. You may want to include your education and focus on what you know is going to be of more interest to this particular employer and this job. And then finally, wrap up why you're interested in this job. Let's look at an example. We start out with, here's my background, with one quick, concise sentence. And then, knowing that we've all had to make critical changes in the way that we deliver services in the past year, here's something that you did that helped a previous client, and you help them then connect the dots of how it might be of value to them. And end with why you're interested in working for this particular organization, because you know that's going to be one of their questions. I hope you find these examples helpful and can identify with some of the examples that you've used in the past that are following this STAR format. Someone's asking, of course, about the handouts and the slides. Yes, these will be available to you when the video is posted on the ADA Focus on Fellows website in about a week. The next question is, what is your greatest strength? Oh my gosh, yes, they are still asking strengths and weakness questions. It may not sound exactly like that, but if you prepare for them, then you can answer the questions that they do ask. So we're looking for not only how are you able to share your knowledge, but what you like to do. It's not bragging, but I go on the premise, if you don't tell us, we don't know. You have to be careful not to make assumptions either over the top or underselling yourself. So a couple of things to keep in mind is tell them about things that you've been complimented on by others. Talk about why you chose this as an example of your strength, and by all means, always give an example of how you used it. Again, I go back to make it relevant. If they ask for just one example, give them one, but be prepared if they want for more than one. And then the opposite of, let me go more in depth in this. Most of us tend to talk about our technical expertise because that's where we have a level of comfort. But if you want to make sure that you are going to be a good fit with that organization, if you want to share with them some of the other things and aspects about yourself that you're bringing to the table, you might want to think about what are those aspects about yourself that have made you successful with your technical expertise. And I'm talking about some of those competencies that I listed earlier. Choose one of these or whatever you feel comfortable using to talk about. And here's a quick example. It has nothing to do with my actual expertise, but it shows how I've demonstrated my communication skills and my ability to organize so that I was able to get a tangible result. And notice that I've used numbers in this result. Whenever you can use numbers in your results, do so. Think about it in terms of time savings, time efficiencies, perhaps a process that you streamlined. Talk about in terms of costs that you've reduced, or perhaps if you were in a revenue generating, a funding role, some of the grants that you were able to bring in and manage. Talk about the dollar values of those. Time, cost, quality. How did you increase the quality of care that you were providing? And how did you know that? That's often through the feedback you get from your patients and clients or people who are stakeholders in your business. And then talk about the quantity or the frequency. Give us the context. If you made a presentation, was it to 50 people or 500 people? That makes a difference in the type of presentation and how they then begin to view you as a communicator. So I hope you're beginning to get a sense of how you can use your examples and use this strategy of the STAR format to talk about your accomplishments in the interview. So how do you approach, what are your weaknesses? Oh my gosh. Mostly we're looking for, do you have a sense of self-awareness? I think we're all beyond saying, well, I don't have any weaknesses. No one does that anymore, I hope. But you also want to look at what weakness can you share that's not going to be detrimental to the interview and you're being selected for the job. So avoid those generic, I work too hard or I'm a perfectionist. Make sure you choose a genuine weakness and that won't get in the way of being selected. And then focus on professional skills more than personal qualities. And most importantly, what are you doing about that weakness? What are you doing to improve or overcome that weakness? And here's a couple of examples. And this refers back to one of the examples I gave earlier. In learning how to delegate and mentoring, what else did you discover about that? You weren't comfortable doing it, but by just jumping in doing it, you find out better and worse ways to do it, but also how it enabled other people to take on more responsibility and develop their skills. Perhaps you realize that you don't have supervisory experience and that this role does require it. What are you going to do to overcome that? What are you already doing to overcome it is an even better example to be able to give them. So here you can see that it's something that you've enrolled in a course and you've also started volunteering to try and practice the skills that you're learning and that you are looking forward to building those skills there. Oh, sorry, skip through that. Back to the poll. Okay, another poll here. Why do you think the strengths and weaknesses questions is still asked? Take a moment to mark any and all of these that you believe are true. Yay, yay. Oh, thank you. I'm so happy. Yes, no, it's really not about trying to make you feel awkward and how do you handle yourself in a situation. At least I hope it isn't. It is all the rest of these. So I think since you got that, we're going to move on through it. So, next question that you're often asked is, what are your career goals? Or where do you see yourself in 3 to 5 years? They want to make sure that your goals are going to be something that is appropriate to the role and the organization that you're joining. They're looking at your level of ambition. And they're also looking in terms of, do you see this role as a short or a long-term part of your career goals, overall career goals? So keep your answers focused. Stress your interests in terms of that long-term career because they really are making a sizable investment in you, both in dollars as well as time, and show your interest, show your enthusiasm. Hopefully you don't get bored when you're talking in these interviews, but I've noticed some people that they can come across that way. So make sure that you're keeping your energy level up as you're talking about your career goals. Here's an example. My goal right now is to find a position in an institution where I can do innovative research. I'd like to assume more management responsibilities and get involved in program strategy. Do you see how these two sentences show a progression from research to management to strategy? So this person definitely has some long-term goals in mind. Now, this question can make some people uncomfortable. And it may not be exactly this question, but sometimes you may get a question that you say, oh, I wish they hadn't asked that. And my advice to you is if there's a question you hope they don't ask, you'd better prepare an answer for that question so that you can answer it better and not be caught off guard. So when they're looking for this, sometimes this is just a matter of a career progression that's common to your profession and to our industry. If it's the next step, then briefly explain that. And if you're making a transition, perhaps from research to clinical or vice versa, why are you doing that? And that's of interest to them. So again, I like to have examples for all of these. So again, this one is just the career progression. And this one is, oh, sometimes things weren't working out like I wanted. As you read this, you're really proud of the programs that I've worked on and managed. However, I think the time has come for a change. We're going through some management changes right now and a lot of projects on hold. Can you read between the lines on that one? Yeah, they're probably going through a downsizing and you're trying to find a job before you get laid off. That is a very standard answer that people can use and customize to your own situation to get through that tricky situation. All right. And the last question that I'm going to offer you today is that question, why do you want to work with us? They're looking at you as trying to find out how you stand out from all the other people that are interviewing for this job. But they also want to know why you have picked them as a place to work and to share your talents and your expertise. They also want to know if your expectations can be met. So again, truthfully, why are you interested in that organization? You know, and if geographical preference has something to do with it, it's okay to mention that. But more often than not, we're going to find that our work is going to have a combination of both remote and on-site service providing. Okay. Now, let me address some of the things that have come up over the last year and a half related to our pandemic interviews. Now, we're looking at how well do we work remotely and how in terms of our technological savvy, being able to get our own computers and systems rolling without having an on-site tech support. being self-directed in the way that you manage your own work, your projects, and your time, and balance that with your family and other needs, and how well you've learned to communicate differently over these new protocols. We're also looking at how have you maintained your own safety and the safeties of other people. For example, you may get a situational or scenario-based question of, tell me about a time when you saw someone in your work team wearing their mask incorrectly or not wearing a mask. How did you approach that situation and what did you do about it? Another thing they're going to be looking at along those same lines are how have you shifted your problem solving and your collaboration skills and abilities during this time of pandemic. Specific examples of what you've done. How are you managing your own stress? First of all, they're interested in what is stressful for you and what are you doing about it? Then, what lessons have you learned over the last year and a half? And what lessons are you continuing to learn? At the end of the interview, you want to make sure that you are asking questions. Oftentimes, people don't make the cut of the finalists because they haven't asked any questions in the interview. And it's very unusual that all your questions will be answered during that interview. So you want to make sure you've got a good list that you can go through and you have some ready at the end of the interview when they ask for them. You always want to be able to gauge the culture through these questions. So many organizations are now focusing on being more inclusive and having a diverse group of people working on their teams. They are making great strides, make a lot of effort on doing tangible things. You might see this on the website, but you also want to see how is that playing out in this particular group that you would be working with. So make sure you're asking questions along those lines. Ask what they like, the interviewers like about working there. Ask them about what their expectations are for the person in this role in the first 3 to 6 months. You'll want to know what your priorities are. And this also helps people overcome feeling blindsided when they get into a new job and find that they're not doing the work that they thought they were going to be doing. Ask them, perhaps describe some of their successful, or if you're feeling risky, some of their non-successful hires. Sometimes humor can help in this aspect of it. And ask them what leadership lessons they have learned over the last year and a half during the pandemic. How have they had to shift how they lead and manage people? And I have a number of resources for you. This is being the first one is a video that you'll have access to when the video is available to you in a week or so. Great questions to ask at the interviewer. And also, when you have asked your questions and gotten their answers, you now have a better way to summarize how you think you're the best candidate for that job, how you think you can really add to and contribute to their team. Ask them what the next steps in the selection process is, because you want to be able to set your own expectations so that you're not sitting on pins and needles waiting to hear back from them if they're still going to take another 3 to 4 weeks to be interviewing people. So you have a better idea of when you should check back in with them to see what the status is of their interview process. And then finally, in closing the interview, make sure that you let them know that you are interested in the job. A lot of times when managers have had to choose between 2 candidates, sometimes it just came down to how enthusiastic was the individual about the job. Did they actually say they wanted to work there? So you can't assume they know, but again, you don't have to go over the top and turn cartwheels for them. So after the interview, first and foremost, your adrenaline is going to be running like crazy. So take a few minutes to just breathe and relax and pat yourself on the back for getting through it. Think about what went well. And this is so hard to do because I know we all instinctively want to jump to, oh, I should have said this or I should have said that. But remember what you did do well in the interview. And then you can make sure that you follow up with a thank you email. And that's when you can bring up the things that you wished you had said in the interview. And you can do it as simply as, when you ask about XYZ, I also wanted to tell you that I had done ABC in that situation or related to that question that you asked. So it's something that you can add to being able to sell yourself as a candidate. And yes, thank you emails can make the difference between selected and not selected. If it's between you and one other candidate, it's these little things that count. I think one of the things that people don't want to do is practice their responses to questions. You really do need to think about that STAR strategy approach to answering questions. You also want to do some research as to what questions are typically asked for the roles that you are interviewed for that are specific to your technical expertise and to your healthcare industry. You either want to record your answers or get someone that you trust. And sometimes the person closest to you may not be the best person because they could be a little too critical, but get someone who'll help you practice your answers and run through it several times. The rule of thumb is practice at least 3 times to make sure you get comfortable with the way you want to answer the questions and what you want to say and what you want to make sure you leave out. Remember, be aware of your voice, your tone, and your body language. Make eye contact with the camera if you're on a video call, and certainly with the person when you're face to face. Have confidence in your preparation and convey that enthusiasm and interest. So hopefully I have a very quick pace and a very high level. I've given you some ideas of what to do before, during, and after the interview and answered a few of your pandemic questions. Before we move to the Q&A, I'd like you to take a moment, both right now and also if you're looking at the video, to think about and write in the chat box, what are the top 3 things that you've learned that you'll do to prep for your next interview? Let's take a few seconds to do that. Okay, so hopefully you had some opportunities to write in the chat here, and I am now going to open us up for Q&A, and I'm going to turn it back to Stephanie because I know that she's been looking at the questions you've been sending in throughout the presentation.
Okay, thanks so much, Ms. Hull. That was very, very helpful. Looks like we don't have too many questions. There was one just at the beginning asking about the best sources to get certified as a diabetes counselor and just upgrading skills and knowledge. So I guess generally, do you have any tips in how to look for jobs that would help, with updating skills or knowledge?
Certainly, I'd be glad to address this, but it may not be an answer you like. I am not an expert in the field of diabetes, so I'm going to refer you right back to your ADA colleagues and what's available on the Focus on Fellows and other elements of the ADA website, which is a wonderful, wonderful portal of information about your profession. The other thing that I would say to that is talk about people who are currently in roles that you aspire to be in, or maybe the next step that you aspire to, and ask them just over the last year, what are 2 or 3 things you did or wished you would have done to get ready for the role that you're in now? So people always like to take advice. There's always a lot of wisdom in hindsight. So that's why I like the question, what do you wished you had done? Or what advice would you give me at this point?
Great, thank you. And here's another one. What does it mean when your interview went well and you were more than qualified for the position, but the employer response is, we've decided to go in a different direction?
A standard response. And that's so sad because it really doesn't give you any feedback. So you can't do this every time, but it's worth a try. You don't know if you don't try, is to get back in touch either with the human resources person or the person that you interviewed with and ask them if they'd be willing to give you some feedback in terms of what they found that they liked about your credentials or about the way that you responded to their questions. And again, what advice would they give you for when you interview again? And also, are there other positions that they would encourage you to apply for that they weren't interviewing it for at this time? So use it, we like to say use it as a networking opportunity, but use it as an opportunity to see if you can get some feedback. Now, what I will tell you is probably the HR person won't give you anything very specific. There's a lot of legal ramifications that you're going to be butting up against, but not to cross any lines. You're just asking and to see what will they share with you so that you can learn. And that's your objective, is what can you help me that I can learn from and do better next time.
Perfect. Thank you. And how do we approach virtual pre-recorded interviews?
Oh, I'm so glad you brought that up. Yes, that's becoming more and more prevalent, where you're given the questions and then you don't actually get to interview with an individual. You just have to record your responses back to a camera. Wow. I think your preparation is key there. You have to, again, preparation and practice, so that you're not exactly reading from a script, but you know your answer so well that it flows naturally. And hopefully using this strategy of this STAR approach will help you in responding to some of the questions that they have. Doing your due diligence to know what they might be looking for behind the questions is also helpful in prepping for these recorded interviews. And I hope that gives you a couple of tips.
Great. Okay, I think that may be it for questions. So maybe we can just circle back, and you gave a lot of great, helpful tips. And just for me personally, what are just the 3 top tips if you had to take away, everything that all the pearls that you gave us during this presentation?
One of the things that I often say to folks that I work with is you can't assume that the employer or the hiring manager is going to connect the dots between what you've done and what they're looking for to have done in this role that they're hiring for. So anytime that you can help them translate your previous experience to the type of work as you understand it that you'd be doing, you're going to take a load off the interviewer, and anything that you can help them to make a better decision is to your advantage. And so help them connect the dots. You often have to think outside the box for this. Sometimes you have to put on a little bit of a business mindset rather than just a clinical or a research mindset. I would say also making sure that in all the examples that you have to share with them, sometimes called accomplishments, is that I go back to that STAR format. You've got to be able to tell the story. And that's what it is. It's telling the story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And the end shows the impact of what you've done. Or if you hadn't done it, what might have happened? How have you mitigated a problem? How did you prevent something from going awry? So those are 2 things. A third thing is practice. And it's what we tend to put off more often than not, me included. I was still practicing as I was waiting for you to come online today. But practice it out loud so you can hear yourself and get your brain and your mouth and jaws working and prepped, especially before the video interviews.
Great. Thank you. Sorry to put you on the spot like that.
No, I'm glad you did. Great questions.
We do have 2 more questions. So one about salary. Is it appropriate to ask about the salary range at the interview? And what do you do when they ask you about salary expectations?
Absolutely. I'm surprised that one wasn't the first question. It often is. More and more organizations are being more and more transparent in their salary ranges now, and you'll find them posted on either their website or in the job description itself, or that it's a public knowledge somewhere. You may have to go someplace like Glassdoor or one of the other well-known forums, maybe Indeed, some of your professional forums, to find out what the salary ranges are. You never want to go in not knowing what the salary range for your profession, your expertise, and your level of experience is. You also have to include in that the geographic area they're working in, or if it's a remote location. Oftentimes you're asked your salary expectations right up front in that screening interview. And the standard rule of thumb is to try and defer giving them a number, but they're going to ask you for that number. So you can either respond by saying that you fully expect to have a competitive salary, that you're aware of the market or the salary ranges in other universities in other parts of the countries or other institutions, and that you expect it would be competitive. If you are finally forced into a box of stating numbers, make sure you state a range, a low and a high point that you're hopefully will then get, if not the high point, at least the midpoint, but that you would be willing to take the low point. Don't give them a range where you're not willing to take the lowest number you give them. But hopefully you can defer that until you get to the job offer time. And then you want to make sure that when you're talking about salary, that you're including not just salary, but the entire compensation package of benefits, etc.
Great. And I think somebody typed here that I've always told them that I want to see if the fit is good prior to discussing salary, and that's worked well for this person.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. So here's another one that I touched upon earlier in the talk, but what is the correct format for tell me about yourself? Do you just read your resume?
Thank you for asking that. Please don't read your resume. Hopefully they've already done that. It's not a bad jumping off point. You can say something along as you've seen from my resume, I have a XYZ degree, and then a one-sentence summary of your work experience, whether you've been in an academic environment, whether you've been teaching, whether you've been in a clinical or research. Give me a category so I know where you're coming from. And then tell me 2 or 3 accomplishments that you're the most proud of. Maybe you didn't get recognition for them, but you're proud of those accomplishments during that time in your experience, and hopefully make those relevant to the kind of work that this role would be doing. So a little bit about your education, your overall background, 2 to 3 accomplishments in the STAR format, and then where do you hope to go from here? In this, for example, in this role, I hope I would be able to continue doing my minimum, or I hope to transition and do more of ABC. So I hope that gives you a quick little structure.
And are there any key body language gestures that we should look out for that indicates how the interview is going?
I think most of us can recognize when eyes are glazing over. So if you see people kind of going, "Aww," then you want to sum up what you're talking about. You've probably been rambling too long and gotten off focus. If you see people, fidgeting a little bit, it could mean anything. It could have nothing to do with what you're saying. So don't try to force a projection on their body language that may or may not be there. Just make sure if you're concerned about how they're responding, stop, ask. Am I answering your question? Is there something else you'd like me to cover? Do a pulse check right there so that you don't continue to ramble on if something they're not interested in or overlook something that they did want.
Great. All right, I think that's just about it for questions. Thank you so much to everybody for all these great questions. And thank you again, Mrs. Hull.
My pleasure.
So this concludes our session today. Again, we'd like to thank you for a great presentation. Thank you also to the Leona M and Harry B. Helmsley Charitable Trust for their support with today's program. I also wanted to thank each one of you for joining us for our Focus on Fellows Earlier Career webinar series. Again, we will be hosting additional sessions this fall, so be on the lookout for an email about the upcoming programs and information about scientific sessions. This concludes our program today. Thank you again for your time, and we look forward to connecting with you at the next Focus on Fellows program.